The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, yet we know less about its depths than we do about outer space. Down there, in the crushing dark, are sounds we cannot explain, ships that vanish without a trace, and creatures no living human should ever see. Tonight, we descend into the 5 deepest ocean mysteries, still unsolved today. Stories whispered by survivors, buried in forgotten reports, and feared by sailors across generations. If you're ready to face the abyss, make sure you subscribe to Real Discoveries USA and join us as we dive into the darkness together. Because some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. Let's move to our first secret. The ocean has no mercy for human curiosity. We build machines to withstand its pressure. We send signals into its black silence, and we tell ourselves that technology makes us safe. But sometimes, what waits? Down there is not pressure, or darkness, or cold, but something we were never meant to find. In 1989, a privately funded deep-sea mission departed from Guam with a small crew of scientists and engineers. Their vessel was called the Argo 9, a reinforced research submersible capable of descending more than 20,000 feet. The mission was routine on paper, mapping unusual geological formations on the floor of the Mariana Trench. But the crew logs tell a different story. And what happened on that mission is something no official report has ever explained. The crew consisted of 5 people: Dr. Helen Merrow, a marine biologist; Commander Aaron Brooks, a former Navy diver; Dr. Emilio Kahn, a geologist; Sarah Fletcher, the communications officer; and Mark Radcliffe, the lead engineer. According to manifests, they were expected to spend just under 2 weeks at sea. What they recorded would never be made public. What little we know comes from a set of tapes recovered months later, tapes that were heavily water damaged, yet preserved just enough to give fragments of conversations. Fragments of fear. It begins calmly, like most tragedies. The first transmissions describe the descent, water rushing over the hull, lights flickering against the abyss, a silence so profound that the only sound inside the vessel was their own breathing. "It feels like falling forever," one voice says. Another replies, "Don't think about it." The Argo 9 passed 10,000 feet without incident. At 15,000 feet, they began hearing noises. The official report claims it was seismic activity, but the voices on the damaged tape tell a different version. A steady, rhythmic tapping began against the outer hull, faint at first, then louder, as if something small was knocking. Like fingernails, one crew member whispered. Another voice said, "That's impossible down here. Nothing's moving at this depth." The knocking continued for almost 3 hours, at 20,000 feet, where no sunlight has ever reached. The knocking stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Crew logs describe pressure fluctuations in the chamber, though none of the instruments showed anything unusual. Fletcher, the communications officer, reported that her headset kept picking up whispers, faint, distorted words, on an unused channel. "They're saying our names," she wrote in her journal, one of the few artifacts found intact after the disaster. "First Helen, then Aaron, then mine. Always one at a time, always in a low voice. I asked the others if they heard it. They told me to get some rest." By day 4 of the mission, the crew's composure was unraveling. Dr. Kahn recorded that he felt as though being watched from outside the portholes, though there was only blackness stretching beyond their floodlights. Radcliffe, the engineer, refused to sleep. In the tapes, his voice grows erratic. "Something's moving with us. It doesn't blink. It doesn't leave." The surviving fragments of transmission reveal something chilling on day 6. Commander Brooks, the most experienced of them all, spoke firmly into the comms. "Stop saying my name. Whoever is doing that, stop now." A pause follows. Then a voice too faint, too distorted to match any of the crew, repeats his name, clearly, slowly. "Aaron." After that, panic spreads. Breathing quickens. Someone mutters, "It's inside the channel." Another voice says, "Shut it off, shut it off." The tape warps, water damaged, but what survives is enough. Brooks shouting, "We're not alone down here." And then silence again. What happened in the final hours aboard the Argo 9 is pieced together only from the last logbook entries. One reads, "The lights outside are gone. Even our own beams don't work anymore. It's like the water eats them." Another, scrawled in shaking handwriting, "If anyone finds this, don't come looking for us. It's not the pressure. It's not the dark. It's something else." The vessel was never recovered. Only a single lifeboat was found drifting weeks later, empty, with no signs of the crew. In its storage compartment were the damaged tapes, the journal, and a waterlogged photograph of the 5 crew members before their descent, smiling. Unaware, to this day, the Argo 9 remains one of the ocean's most unexplained events. No wreckage on the seafloor, no evidence of implosion, no human remains. Just whispers in the recordings, repeating the names of people who were never seen again. Some dismiss it as stress-induced paranoia. Others believe it was staged, a hoax, a cover-up. But for those who've heard the surviving fragments, the faint tapping, the voice repeating each crew member's name, the terror feels all too real. Because if something was calling to them from the black, then it means something was down there. Something still is. Let's move to our 2 secret. The ocean has many faces. To some, it is calm, a glittering surface stretching forever beneath the sun. But for those who have spent their lives on the water, there are darker tales, strange accounts of things that do not belong, of waters that should never exist. This secret is one of them. Sailors called it the black tide, and if the reports are to be believed, it was never just a story. In the summer of 1979, a distress call was picked up by the U.S. Coast Guard off the Philippine Sea. The transmission came from a freighter known as the Katsura Maru, a mid-sized Japanese cargo ship hauling supplies across the Pacific. The captain's voice was panicked, broken, and barely intelligible. "Capsized, flooding, men trapped," was all the radio operators could make out before the line dissolved into static. Within hours, a Coast Guard vessel was dispatched, with divers aboard. What they found when they reached the coordinates has never been explained, according to recovered records. The Katsura Maru had overturned but remained partially buoyant, the hull exposed above the waterline. There were no crew on deck. No lifeboats had been deployed. The Coast Guard divers suited up and prepared to enter the capsized vessel, where survivors might be trapped. The water was calm, eerily calm, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. The divers cut their way into the overturned freighter and descended inside. They expected pitch darkness and normal seawater flooding the compartments. What they found instead was something none of them were prepared for. The water inside the hull was black. Not the natural darkness of the deep, but a liquid so thick it absorbed their floodlights completely. Even at arm's length, their hands disappeared from sight. "Like oil," one of them said later, "but colder, heavier, wrong." The first diver reported movement in the black liquid ripples with no source, as though the water itself was alive. His breathing quickened over the combs. "It's swallowing the light," he said. "It's not reflecting, it's drinking." Then, his line cut out. The second diver went after him, following the tether. His final words were recorded. "Something's down here. Get us out." Then silence. By the time the Coast Guard pulled the lines back, both divers were gone. No bodies, no suits. Nothing but severed ends of tether, dripping with the same oily substance. The rest of the dive team refused to enter. They begged the commander to abandon the operation, but the freighter still floated there, silent, waiting. The Coast Guard filed their official report as hazardous conditions due to chemical spill. But crewmen who were there told a different story years later, in whispers. They said the liquid wasn't oil. They said it clung to their suits, staining the material in patterns that looked almost like handprints. They said that as they drifted near the overturned hull, they could hear knocking sounds coming from inside, not random, rhythmic, like fists pounding for release. No survivors were ever found. The Katsura Maru eventually sank during a storm 2 days later, taking its black cargo to the bottom of the ocean. Yet for months afterward, fishermen in the region claimed to see slicks of dark water rising suddenly to the surface, spreading across the waves before disappearing again without trace. Birds that landed on the patches never flew away. Nets dragged through them came back empty, the ropes eaten away by something corrosive. Even now, decades later, the story of the black tide persists. Mariners whisper about stretches of ocean where the water feels thicker, heavier, darker than it should be, as though a piece of that freighter's curse still lingers. And every so often, another ship vanishes in that same stretch of sea, with no distress call, no wreckage, nothing left but silence. Those who believe say the Katsura Maru stumbled into something older than mankind, something that was never meant to be disturbed, a living tide, a hunger waiting in the water. And they warn that if you ever see the ocean turn black beneath you, don't wait, don't investigate, leave everything behind and run, because once it touches you, it does not let go. That move to our 3 secret. The ocean does not merely conceal bodies, wreckage, or debris. It hides voices, not the soft calls of dolphins or the mournful cries of whales, but something older, stranger, and incomprehensible. For centuries, sailors spoke of a song carried across the waves, a melody that seemed to come from nowhere, and that left those who heard it changed forever. This is the story of one such song, recorded in 1997, deep below the Mariana Trench, and the lives it consumed. The origins of the recording are as mysterious as the sound itself. The device was a high-sensitivity hydrophone, part of a classified naval research project aimed at mapping ocean sounds in extreme depths. On June 12, 1997, the hydrophone picked up something extraordinary. At first, the engineers assumed it was a whale, or perhaps an underwater seismic anomaly. But the sound, a low, melodic oscillation, persisted, repeating in ways that no known creature could produce. It rose and fell in patterns that resembled a song, haunting in its beauty, yet terrifying in its structure. Dr. Leonard Hayes, a sound engineer and oceanographer, was the first to study the recordings. In his notes, he wrote, "It is music, but not made by any human or animal known to exist. Listening is physically intoxicating. I felt compelled to keep listening, to hear every note, and I know I am not the same as before." Within days, Dr. Hayes' team noticed that every person who spent more than an hour analyzing the recordings began exhibiting unusual behaviors. Some became obsessed, refusing to leave their offices, replaying the sound for hours. Others began experiencing severe paranoia, claiming that the song whispered their names, urged them to go into the ocean, to leave everything behind and follow. By the 3rd week, the project had become a containment issue. The Naval Research Team tried to erase the recordings and disband the study, but fragments had been copied, downloaded, and some circulated online in encrypted forums. Those who heard even short portions of the melody reported similar effects: a creeping compulsion, obsessive curiosity, and vivid hallucinations of figures moving under the waves. Some disappeared without a trace after claiming they had to go to it. The most chilling case came from a retired submarine officer named Captain Elias Monroe. He reported hearing the song during a routine sonar calibration exercise while stationed near a trench off Guam. In his testimony, he described how the sound seemed to penetrate my thoughts, reshaping my perception of depth, space, and time. He wrote that for 3 consecutive nights he could hear the melody even while ashore, faint and distant, yet impossible to ignore. On the 4th night, he vanished. His boat was found anchored near the trench, but he was nowhere to be seen. Researchers, who studied the recording later attempted to isolate the frequencies. Most conventional sound meters could not capture the lowest components, and the higher frequencies caused acute physical reactions, nausea, headaches, and hallucinations. It was as though the ocean itself was speaking, and those who heard it, too clearly became vessels for something incomprehensible. One of the surviving naval engineers, Dr. Marissa Klein, explained it this way: "It's not just sound, it's something encoded into the fabric of the water. Every wave carries a fragment, every depth, a new variation. If you hear it, even for a moment, it writes itself into your mind." The team attempted to destroy the hydrophone and all recordings, but multiple copies survived. Small snippets continue to circulate even today, usually removed quickly after reports of inexplicable psychological effects emerge. The survivors who were willing to speak in detail all describe similar patterns. First, there is fascination, an irresistible need to replay the melody. Then comes obsession, a feeling that you must see what the sound represents, that somewhere beneath the water, something awaits that you must meet. Then, the hallucinations begin. Shapes swimming in the darkness, lights that do not belong to any natural source, and faces sometimes friendly, sometimes grotesque, staring back at you from below. And then, some vanish, sometimes leaving only notes or recordings explaining that they had to join the song beneath the waves. One researcher left a diary entry that chills to this day. "I hear it in the rain. I hear it when I close my eyes. I cannot sleep. I cannot think of anything else. If I do not see it soon, I will follow it into the depths." The words are scrawled across several pages, ink smudged, handwriting trembling. That diary was recovered weeks later from a laboratory abandoned without explanation. No trace of the researcher was ever found. Naval archives later confirmed multiple instances of disappearances that coincided with recordings of the song, spanning from classified sonar exercises in the late 1980s to the known 1997 recording. In almost every case, the subjects were highly trained individuals, scientists or military personnel, unlikely to fall victim to hysteria or superstition. Yet the pattern is undeniable. Those exposed to the melody for extended periods vanished, or reported profound psychological transformation. Even civilians have claimed to encounter fragments of the sound while sailing near the Mariana Trench. Fishermen described a low hum in the water that made them shiver in places they didn't know existed, and an overwhelming feeling that the ocean itself was calling. A few reported seeing shapes, dark and impossible, moving just beneath, the waves retreating when approached. Many refused to speak publicly, fearing ridicule. Yet their stories mirror the official disappearances with disturbing accuracy. The question that haunts investigators and listeners alike is this: what is the song? A naturally occurring phenomenon, a creature of unimaginable intelligence, or something entirely beyond human comprehension? Scientists have debated endlessly. Some suggest it is bioacoustic, produced by a deep-sea organism larger than anything discovered. Others posit it is an electromagnetic anomaly encoded into the water. Yet no explanation fully accounts for the psychological effects, the compulsive obsessions, or the vanishings. Today, fragments of the 1997 recording remain accessible, though heavily restricted. Listening to them is considered a controlled experiment, with protocols designed to limit exposure time. Even in these limited trials, volunteers report intense emotional reactions, hallucinations, and the sensation of an unseen presence observing them. One volunteer wrote, "It's as if the song knows who I am. It teases me with promises, with warnings, and yet I cannot stop listening." For those who have heard it in its entirety, the results are invariably the same. They describe a sense of being drawn downward, a pull into the water that grows stronger with every replay. Some attempt to resist, but the compulsion grows stronger than physical willpower, and eventually, they vanish. Only their accounts, recordings, or fragments of diaries remain. The song beneath the waves is more than a mystery. It is a warning. Its power extends beyond the ocean floor, affecting those who come too close, those who listen too long. For now, it remains largely confined to classified archives and whispered tales among scientists and sailors. But every so often, the melody escapes, carried on currents or scattered recordings, and claims new listeners, the curious, the brave, or the foolhardy, who hear the call and cannot resist. It is said that one day, if someone listens long enough, they will not merely disappear. They will join the song, becoming part of it, living only as a voice beneath the waves, calling to the next. And if this is true, then perhaps the ocean has a voice older than mankind itself, a voice that will never stop singing, never stop calling, and will continue to claim those who hear it. Let's move to our fourth secret. The ocean holds legends older than maps and charts. For centuries, sailors whispered about figures seen near whirlpools and sudden storms, creatures neither fish nor human, whose presence could not be explained. One of these legends is known as the glass diver. Those who claim to have seen it insist that it is more than folklore, and while many dismiss these stories as tales spun from too much time at sea, the accounts share unnerving consistency, details no casual imagination could invent. The earliest recorded encounter comes from a Japanese fishing log in 1912. A vessel returning from deep waters near the Ryukyu Trench reported a figure rising just above a whirlpool. The fisherman described it as a humanoid shape, encased in a transparent, reflective shell, resembling a diver's suit made entirely of glass. It had no face, or rather, its face mirrored theirs, perfectly, as if reflecting not reality, but intent. When they approached, the figure vanished into the water, leaving a calm so unnatural that even seasoned sailors felt a shiver of terror. The story resurfaces in scattered logs throughout the decades. Sailors in the 1960s describe a similar figure near the Mariana Trench, appearing after sudden whirlpools formed without warning. Some who watched it closely reported that it imitated their movements, gestures, even their expressions. In one account, a fisherman's hand had been raised, and the figure mirrored it precisely, as if studying him. When the fisherman turned to call his crew, the figure was gone. Yet in the boat's reflection on the water, its mirrored image lingered for a moment longer, unnervingly persistent. Modern encounters began in the 1980s, when deep-sea research became more common. One account comes from a team exploring a newly discovered trench off Guam. The team had descended in a submersible, their lights cutting through the dark like knives. One researcher, Dr. Jonas Riley, reported seeing a figure at the edge of the trench, a diver entirely encased in a crystalline shell that reflected the submersible's lights back at them. Its movements were deliberate, gliding toward the trench wall before vanishing. When asked to draw the sighting later, every team member sketched nearly identical images, despite never seeing each other's versions. But the most chilling element of the glass diver legend lies in what follows those who see it. Fishermen and researchers alike report a compulsion, subtle at first, to approach the water again. They speak of dreams in which the diver rises from the depths, beckoning with a mirrored hand, showing a reflection that is almost them, yet not. Those who succumb to the compulsion often vanish. Boats are found empty, nets intact, and logbooks abandoned mid-entry, pages wet with seawater, or ink smeared as if by trembling hands. In 1994, a documentary crew working near the Mariana Trench captured sonar anomalies that some believe were related to the glass diver. The sonar returned readings of an object moving too fluidly for any human or known marine animal. Crew testimony describes a figure visible in the distance, reflecting light in a way that seemed unnatural, too precise, and somehow sentient. One diver's log describes it as watching, knowing, waiting. Within 2 weeks, 3 crew members had resigned, citing sleep disturbances, hallucinations of mirrored faces, and an inexplicable longing to return to the trench. Accounts of disappearances and compulsion share another common detail: the reflective nature of the diver. Witnesses insist that the glass diver does not merely exist in water, but in perception. It shows a reflection sometimes of oneself, sometimes of the observer's fears or desires, that feels more real than reality itself. Dr. Riley later stated, "It's not the shape that frightens you, it's the way it becomes you. It studies you, mirrors your intentions, and waits until your mind is weak enough to follow it." One particularly eerie account comes from a Japanese naval officer in 2002. He reported that while monitoring the trench via remotely operated vehicles, one of the ROV's cameras picked up a figure appearing in the distance. The ROV's lights reflected off its glass-like body, creating dozens of mirrored images on the ocean floor. When the officer attempted to maneuver the ROV closer, the figure vanished entirely. But subsequent footage showed brief reflections in the control monitor images of the officer himself, slumped over his desk as if staring at the trench from inside the monitor. Psychologists who later evaluated him concluded he was hallucinating, yet his logs indicated he had been alone at the time. The glass diver does not attack, at least not in the traditional sense. It does not destroy ships or drag victims into the depths. Its danger is subtler, psychological, predatory in a manner unlike anything known. Those who see it become obsessed with finding it again. They track the same waters, wait for whirlpools to form, stare at reflections in portholes, mirrors, and glass. Friends and family describe them as changed, distant, pale, and increasingly withdrawn. They speak of seeing themselves differently, mirrored, sometimes in another's face entirely, until one day, they vanish. A surviving witness, retired fisherman Hiroshi Takeda, recounted his encounter decades later. He had seen the diver rise silently from a whirlpool, its glassy surface reflecting his own face. He described the experience as hypnotic, a compulsion to leap into the water. He resisted, returning home shaken. Yet every year thereafter, he claims he saw mirrored versions of himself in windows, puddles, and fish tanks, each reflection whispering, coaxing him back to the sea. He lived, but never truly escaped the diver's influence. Legends surrounding the glass diver also warn that it is not confined to a single ocean. Reports emerge from multiple regions, often where deep, uncharted waters exist. The phenomenon may be older than recorded history. A force tied to the ocean's deepest trenches and whirlpools, manifesting only to those whose minds are vulnerable. It reflects, observes, and waits, and it has a patience measured in decades. Today, research teams exploring deep-sea trenches take unusual precautions. Mirrors and reflective surfaces are minimized in submersibles. Psychologists advise limiting observation of unknown figures in deep waters, and yet, accounts continue. One recent log from a submersible team describes seeing a humanoid figure rising from the depths, perfectly mirrored in the pilot's visor. Crew members described a compulsion to reach toward it, a sensation that if they did not, something within them would be lost. Within hours, the crew reported nausea, disorientation, and a strong urge to descend further. All but one refused. The glass diver's legend endures because it is fundamentally unknowable. It is neither alive in the way we understand life, nor dead. It exists in the margins of perception, in reflections, in the pull of deep water currents, and in the fragile mind of any observer. To encounter it is to confront yourself, magnified, twisted, and mirrored in a being that waits with endless patience. Those who vanish are often assumed lost to the ocean, but some believe the diver does not kill. It waits, it mirrors, it studies, and eventually, the observer disappears not into the sea, but into reflection itself, becoming another mirrored presence. another whisper in the glass that waits for the next sailor to peer too closely. Let's move to our 5 secret. The ocean is full of songs, most of them harmless. The calls of whales, the clicks of dolphins, the hum of currents. But deep below the surface, where no sunlight penetrates, there are melodies that no human was meant to hear. This is the story of the abyssal siren, a phenomenon reported by deep-sea explorers and sailors alike, whose presence is marked not by sight, but by sound, a sound that compels, terrifies, and ultimately consumes those who listen. The first documented account comes from a research expedition in 1985. A small team of oceanographers was deploying hydrophones in the Philippine Trench to record deep-sea ambient sounds. According to the official log, everything was routine until the equipment began picking up an anomalous, structured sound at an extreme depth of nearly 30,000 feet. The sound was melodic, almost hypnotic, and unlike any known marine life. At first the team assumed it was a mechanical fault, a feedback loop in the hydrophones. But soon, it became clear that what they were hearing was real, an organized, recurring song emanating from the abyss. Dr. Ingrid Sorensen, the lead marine biologist on the expedition, later described the effect of the sound on the crew. It was subtle at first, she wrote, a tug at your attention, like something calling you softly, but it grew. You didn't just hear it, you felt it inside you, pressing on your mind, pulling your thoughts toward it. Those who listened too long began murmuring, staring at the water, as if expecting it to respond. By the 3rd day of the recordings, several crew members reported vivid hallucinations. They described seeing shadows beneath the waves, elongated, forms moving just out of sight, and lights that shifted and glimmered in impossible patterns. One technician claimed the song was speaking his name, coaxing him toward the edge of the ship. Others reported dreams in which the sound became a tangible presence, floating in the water, reaching for them, whispering secrets they could not fully comprehend. Despite these warnings, the team continued their work, believing they were observing a natural phenomenon. The hydrophone captured the sound in high fidelity, revealing a complex structure that resembled a language of sorts, patterns that repeated with deliberate precision. Analysts suggested it might be a form of communication from an unknown, deep-sea species, possibly intelligent, and far beyond anything previously discovered. By the 6th day, the psychological strain was evident. Crew members grew irritable, distant, and increasingly obsessed with the sound. Some refused to leave the hydrophone station, claiming they could feel it more clearly if they stayed near the recording device. Sleep became impossible for several individuals. Dreams were filled with visions of the abyss, endless dark water, shapes that slithered and glimmered, and a voice, soft and melodic, that urged them to dive into the depths and join it. The tragedy occurred on the 8th day. Dr. Sorensen and 3 others entered the small submersible for a routine survey near the trench where the song seemed strongest. Communications with the surface crew became erratic, filled with static and fragmented words. The final transmissions, recovered from the submersible's black box, described the sound as growing louder, as if it had discovered them. One voice said, "It is coming for us. It knows our names. It wants us in the water." The submersible was later found drifting at the edge of the trench, empty. No bodies were recovered. The recording devices were intact but captured only static and faint echoes of the song. The remaining crew on the surface were traumatized, reporting that they could still hear fragments of the melody in their dreams, and, occasionally, faintly over the radio. They described a pervasive sense of being watched, as though the song had followed them beyond the trench itself. The abyssal siren is not merely a sound, it is a predator of the mind. Analysts studying the recordings noted that prolonged exposure causes compulsive behavior, obsession, and, in many cases, disappearance. Volunteers who listened to fragments of the sound in controlled conditions reported immediate psychological effects: nausea, tremors, hallucinations, and a profound sense of longing. Many could not explain why they felt an urgent need to go into deep water, to follow the song wherever it might lead. Several years later, reports emerged from civilian sailors who encountered similar phenomena. Fishing boats in remote regions of the Pacific reported hearing faint melodies beneath the waves at night. Those who listened closely often disappeared without a trace. In some cases, survivors described an irresistible compulsion to dive into the water, sometimes abandoning ships and equipment and vanishing into the dark abyss. The phenomenon was not restricted to any single location. It appeared wherever the deepest trenches of the ocean were found. The song itself remains unclassified, with only fragments surviving in naval archives. Analysis shows it contains a structure far more complex than any human language, pattern, or music. It evokes emotional responses beyond simple fear or attraction. It generates obsession, longing, and ultimately submission to the abyss. Some researchers hypothesize that it is a form of communication from a highly evolved, intelligent deep-sea organism. Others suggest it may be a phenomenon beyond biological life entirely, perhaps a psychic echo of the ocean itself. Those who have survived brief exposure to the song describe a distinct series of stages. First comes curiosity, a quiet attraction. Then fascination, an inability to focus on anything but the sound. Following this is obsession, with the individual unable to resist, replaying or following the melody. Finally, disappearance. The person is drawn into the water, never to return. In some accounts, traces remain: a diary, a personal log, or a recording of their final words, but the physical body is gone, leaving only the echo of the song in memory and recording. Dr. Sorensen later published a heavily redacted account of her experiences, warning others: the abyssal siren is patient. It waits, unseen, beneath waters no human should enter. It is not a predator in the conventional sense. It does not hunt with teeth or claws. It hunts with your mind, your curiosity, your desire to know. If you hear it, even for a moment, it will follow you,